we are continuing today the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And John earlier read the first half, the first third of Genesis chapter 3. And that's all of that story we're going to look at today. We're going to look at more of it after Pentecost. I think next week I've got the first of 2 sermons on Pentecost, since Pentecost is right around the corner here. And we'll take the look at the rest of the story after Pentecost. There's too much there to deal with all in one time, I think, and to deal with it effectively. And we're still not dealing with a lot of stuff, but going to hit the main things today. And the main things, I think, in this story are trust, certainty, and the knowledge of good and evil. A couple weeks ago, we saw how when God created everything, He finished that creation by looking at all of creation, the earth, the water, the fish, the birds, the animals, the people, the plants, and said, it's all very good. And if God said everything was created very good, I think it's reasonable to ask, how did things go so very wrong? Because it doesn't take much looking around in the world around us to see that things have gone very wrong. There's too much exploitation. Well, any exploitation is too much. There's lots and lots of exploitation. There are more slaves alive, there are more people in slavery in the world today than there were at the height of the African slave trade. As horrible as that was, and the war we fought in this country to put an end to it, there are people dying in poverty, people dying of malnutrition, people dying of treatable diseases because they don't have the medical care, people dying of starvation, people suffering under exploitation. And these things happen on a grand, global, and national scale, and they happen on very personal scales, where people are abused and exploited and used and degraded and humiliated by folks not in a distant seat of power, but someone closer to them. Maybe known, maybe unknown. There's a lot that's wrong in the world. How did it go so wrong? I think that question is what led to Genesis chapter 3 being included in the Bible, is to respond to that question. Because things have been wrong for a long, long time. And even at the time that the Bible was first being written, people could look around and say, it says very good, what happened? What happened? And whether you see Genesis chapter 3 as historical reality or as a parable or an allegory, it's a response to that question. And we're going to take a look at that. But first, we got to answer one other question. What is sin? Because the simple answer to what went wrong is sin. But what is sin? And we need to talk about that a little bit, because sin is a concept that we easily get wrong simply because of our cultural bias that we've grown up with. For the most part in the Western world, Western Europe and the United States, and churches that have grown up into and out of those cultures, sin is viewed as a legal term. God has a list of rules, a list of laws. To sin is to violate the rules, to violate God's law. God says do something and we don't do it, it's a sin. God says don't do something and we do it, it's a sin. And sin has become a legal term in our culture. But originally it had a much broader range of meaning that I think is important to take a look at for this. Because sin is much more than just a legal term. Sin is a relational term. And it's a directional term. So sin, in the Hebrew word, did carry a sense of a violation of law. But it originally carried a sense of getting off course, being off track. And God, very early on, communicating with His people about Himself, it was about following Him, following His way. So if God says we're going to Miami, and God heads south and we head west, we've gotten off course. We've gotten off track. We're not going to go to Miami. And that is sin, to be off course. We're not heading in the way that God is going and the way that God is leading us, following the course that God has set out for us. That's sin. The Greek word for sin has a similar but slightly different meaning. It's an archery term, and it means to be off target. So if you're shooting an arrow to target and you miss the target, that's sin. Not in the moral sense, but as we're looking at the moral and spiritual part of our lives, when we get off target for what God intends for us, when we stray from the purpose which God has intended for us, that's sin. So it's not just a breaking of a rule. That's one way of looking at it. But it's being off target, it's being off course. That's what sin. And where did we get off course? Genesis chapter 3 is the answer of where and how we got off course. The sad story of Adam and Eve. And I'm going to tell this as a story. And I'm hoping the kids like the story aspect of this too. And kids kind of remember stories, and maybe some of y'all will like the story aspect of it as well. So it was the very first man called Adam, the very first woman called Eve. And they lived in a perfect garden. They had everything they needed. God gave them a whole bunch of trees with fruit growing on them and said you can eat the fruit. He gave them a whole bunch of plants growing on the ground that they could pick the seeds and eat the seeds, or they could eat the plants. Some of them grew underground, carrots and potatoes, all sorts of wonderful things that they could eat, and it was all there. And the only work they had to do was pick it and eat it. God just grew it for them. There were lots of things to do in the garden. There were lots of things that they knew. They knew which plants tasted good and which ones didn't. Which plants were good at which time of year. They knew the animals. They knew every animal. The name of you know a lot of animal names. Do you know the name of every animal in the world? No. Do you? No. Adam and Eve knew the name of every animal in the world. And this will blow your mind. They could talk to the animals. And the animals could talk back. And so they learned some things from the animals. They learned some things about the animals. And they were perfectly safe. There were lions there. There were bears. There were tigers. But they weren't eating the people. They weren't even eating each other. They weren't even eating the deer. They were eating the fruits and the vegetables and the plants too. They all lived together. Now, there were a lot of things that Adam and Eve knew. And there were a lot of things that they could eat. There was one thing they knew they were not supposed to eat. God told them, there's a tree in the garden. It's not an apple tree. Apples are good to eat. You can eat as many apples as you want. Not a pear tree. Pears are good to eat. You can eat as many pears as you want. Not a fig tree. Figs are good to eat. You can eat as many of those as you want. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As far as we know, there was only ever one tree that was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it had a fruit on it that looked very good and smelled very good. But when you ate it, it gave you the knowledge of good and of evil, of good and bad, of right and wrong. And God said to Adam and Eve, don't eat that one. You can eat all of the others. Don't eat that one. Why, God? Why can't we eat that one? Because if you eat it, God told the man, you will certainly die. So the man's like, I'm not eating that. I've just been made. I don't want to die. Got all of these other good things to eat, all of these other good things to do. And this woman and I, we're getting to know each other. Things are going great. We're perfectly safe. There's no biting bugs. There's no biting animals. There's no one trying to hurt us. We are completely safe, even though we have no weapons, no guns, no knives. We're not even wearing anything to protect our bodies. We're just here, enjoying life and enjoying the world. They had everything they needed. There was at least one thing they didn't have. They didn't know good and evil. They didn't. I don't think they would have even understood the question. Adam, if you'd asked Adam, what's right and what's wrong? Adam was like, what? What do you mean, what's right and what's wrong? What's good and what's evil? I don't know. I know there's a tree with that name, but I really don't know what the tree tells us. They didn't know that. They didn't know anything about good and evil, but they were in perfect relationship with each other, perfect relationship with the animals and the world around them, and perfect relationship with God. And they didn't know the first thing about good and about evil. That sounds pretty good. Sounds pretty good. God said it was very good. But, there's always a but in this kind of story. But then the snake came. And this snake didn't look like any snake that you or I have ever seen. This snake had legs. We don't know how big it was. Might have been a big snake. I don't know. Might have been a little snake. I don't know. But we know this. It was a talking snake. We know it was a talking snake because it talked to Eve. Now, I don't know about you. If a snake came up to tell me anything, I would be more interested in the fact that the snake could talk than anything at all that the snake had to say. In fact, I would probably forget what the snake said in my hurry to go tell someone, hey, there's a talking snake over here. But Adam and Eve, they weren't particularly surprised that the snake could talk. I suspect because they'd talked to other animals before. And this snake was smart, wise, crafty. The wisest and craftiest animal that God had made, this walking, talking snake. And he talked to the woman, Eve. He asked her a question. He said, Eve, is it true that God said you weren't allowed to eat from the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? And Eve said, no. You've misunderstood something. God did not say that at all. We certainly can eat from many of the trees, the fruit of many of the trees. In fact, most of the trees, in fact, all of the trees except one. There's one tree in the middle of the garden. We're not allowed to eat the fruit from that tree. In fact, God said we can't even touch it or we'll die. We'll certainly die. Now, the woman made a mistake. We don't know whether she made the mistake on purpose or maybe that the man, or Adam, made the mistake when he told her what God had said, but that's not what God had. It's almost what God had said. God said, don't eat it and you'll die. God didn't say anything about touching it. So I think maybe Adam or Eve were just trying to be extra careful and say, well, if eating it will make us die, we probably shouldn't even touch it. Let's just be safe. Like I don't have to stay 10 feet away from the electrical outlets in the house. I just don't need to put my finger inside one. But maybe if I stay far away from it, I won't even be tempted. I can be near this, we'll have a campfire. I know I shouldn't put my hand in it. I don't even want to get too close to it. Maybe that's what they were thinking. But we know this, that the snake lied to Eve. Well, actually, the snake told Eve 3 true things and 1 lie. And he told the lie first. Eve said, we can't eat it, we can't even touch it, or we will certainly die. That's what God said. And the snake said, you will not certainly die. He was like, well, what will happen if we eat it? Is it good food? And they said, it's very good food. God doesn't want you to eat it. He knows if you eat it, your eyes will be open. You'll see things as they really are. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, those last 3 things were all true. If they ate that fruit, their eyes would be open. They would understand things they didn't understand before. And they would know good and evil. And that would make them more like God. Those 3 things were true. The lie was that they wouldn't certainly die. God said they would certainly die. They wouldn't certainly die. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason, Eve and Adam, who was right there with her and did exactly what Eve was doing, They trusted the snake more than they trusted God. Maybe it was because the snake explained it more. All God said was, don't eat or you will surely die. Don't eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat that fruit. Eat the fruit from all the other trees, but don't eat that fruit or you will certainly die. He didn't explain anything about this eyes being open. He didn't explain anything about them becoming like God. He didn't explain anything about what it meant to have the knowledge of good. The snake explained some things. The snake gave him some information. Maybe the snake was right. Maybe he sounds right. That kind of makes sense. Surely God must have knowledge of good and evil. Otherwise, how would we know what the tree is? Maybe God doesn't want us to be like Him, even though God had made them to be like Him. And so Eve, she looked at the fruit and she said, man, that looks good. That looks good. I think it's not going to bring me death. It's going to bring me life. It'll be good for eating. Smells like it'll taste delicious. And it will make me wise. It'll make us wise. Me and Adam both. And so she took it. She picked the fruit from the tree and she ate some of it and she gave the rest to Adam and he ate some too. And what the snake said happened. Their eyes were open. Their eyes were open. And they knew good and evil. And they felt two things almost immediately. Now that their eyes were open and they knew good and evil, they felt afraid and they felt ashamed. They were afraid and they were ashamed. And they said, this business of not wearing clothing to protect ourselves, it's embarrassing, it's shameful, we are ashamed and we're afraid. If we don't protect ourselves, who will protect us? So they found a fig tree and they got some leaves from the fig tree and they sewed the leaves together to make clothes for themselves. This is a bad plan. Fig leaves are itchy and they're scratchy and they're not very big and their sap is sticky and it makes your skin burn and itch. And they said, we got to do something. We're ashamed and we're afraid. But they hadn't died, at least as far as they knew. But in some sense, they did die. Now, we'll talk about the dying part next time we talk about this. But I kind of feel for Adam and Eve. I can relate to them because I like to know. I like to have things explained to me. When my parents gave me instructions, when my teachers gave, particularly by the time I got to college and seminary and law school, I was never one for because I said so. I had professors that answered my questions, and I would want them to explain. And literally had people say, I'm a PhD and you're not. I'm like, well, that doesn't make you right. Tell me. If you can't explain it, maybe you don't really understand it. Do you like to have stuff explained to you, AJ? When there's a rule, do you like to know why the rule is the rule? I think a lot of people like that. I can sympathize with Adam and Eve. And I want to know what's right and what's wrong. I want to know what's good and what's bad. So I don't do the bad things. And if it's on the bad things list, I want to know why it's on the bad things list. I can understand that. I can understand that. But here's the thing, and we are going to talk about the death thing a little bit. But as near as I can tell, the knowledge of good and evil has time and time and time and time again led human beings into death. Let me give you an example. You know about the Catholic Church, or you've heard about the Catholic Church. I have no beef against the Catholic Church. I'm going to say something about the Catholic Church that's going to sound negative, but I'm going to, right after I'm done with that, I'm going to say the same thing about the other churches. All right? I got no beef with the Catholic Church. Got a bunch of family members that are Catholic. Learned a lot of good things from different Catholic folks over the years. But there was a time when the Catholic Church was one of the only churches. And things started to go bad. And people started to get kind of lazy and greedy and power hungry. And the leaders in the Catholic Church said, we need to change this. We need to reform, they said. But it's not the Reformation you're thinking of. It was before that. Long time before that. We need to reform because we can see that bad things are happening and more bad things are happening and fewer good things are happening. So they made a very clear list of these are the good things and these are the bad things. And everybody needs to be doing the good things and stop doing the bad things. And they said that and they taught that and they preached that, and a lot of people said, no thank you. No thank you. And it was causing a lot of problems in the world. For families, for counties, for countries, for towns, for communities, for cities. And so the church said, we got to be done with this. We got to find the bad people and make them stop doing the bad things. And if they don't, we'll hurt them until they agree to stop doing the bad things. And if they still don't stop doing the bad things, we'll kill them because it's better for them not to be here than for them to be doing the bad things. They don't do that still, by the way. But that's what they were doing. And then there were some people within the Catholic Church that said, this is just as bad, maybe worse than the bad stuff as before. We need to reform. And that's the reform that you know about, the Reformation. Martin Luther led that one and others. And they said all of these things the church is doing, there's a whole bunch of things the church is doing. They say it's good, but it's really bad. Here's the list of good things. Here's the good things. And we're going to fight against the bad things. And for a while they did that. And they invited people to join them. And it was good. Fewer people doing these bad things. But then they realized there were a lot of people still doing these bad things. And they said, we've got to stop them from doing those bad things. We've told them they're bad. We've taught them that they're still doing the bad things. So we've got to force them to stop doing the bad things. And if they won't stop, then we'll hurt them until they stop doing the bad things. And if they still don't stop, we'll kill them. And the church and God's people have played that game over and over and over again, on big scale and small, in local churches and families, all the way up to governments and nations. The church has played that game over and over and over again. And our knowledge of good and evil has led us to do all sorts of evil in the name of God and in the name of good. I think the knowledge of good and evil, I think that fruit was like honey. AJ, did you know that when you were a little baby, you were not allowed to eat honey? Did you know that? Do you like honey? Yeah, honey's good, right? And you could eat honey now, but when you were a little baby, you were not allowed to eat honey. And when Aiden was a little baby, he was not allowed to eat honey. And when Shay was a little baby, he was not allowed to eat honey. He's old enough to eat honey, though. You got to be at least a year old. Once you're a year old, you can. Is honey poisonous as far as you know, Aiden? No, honey's not poisonous. But there's stuff in honey that, like bacteria and other things, that you and I can eat, and it's okay. But little babies, they're not mature enough. And that stuff that's in honey will grow in them and make them sick and could even kill them. Because they're not ready for the honey yet. They're not mature enough for the honey yet. Their bodies aren't ready for it. I think the knowledge of good and evil is like that. I think that fruit is for humanity what honey is for little babies. That we just weren't ready for it. Adam and Eve weren't ready for it. And as near as I can tell, we're still not ready for it. We still misuse it over and over and over again. Adam and Eve lived in perfect relationship with God, with each other, and the natural world with no knowledge of good and evil. But once they thought they had that figured out, everything went wrong. Everything went wrong. I think they were two deadly, well, we're just going to talk about this one deadly temptation today. The knowledge of good and evil was a deadly temptation. They wanted that. But I think the reason why they wanted it is they wanted to be certain. God just said, trust me, Adam and Eve, that's bad for you. You will certainly die if you eat that. That's bad for you. Trust me. The snake said, I can prove it to you that it's okay. Just eat it. They wanted to be certain. God wanted them to trust. They wanted to be certain. And that's the same choice God gives all of us. Trust me. You're never going to get all the answers. You're never going to know good and evil the way God knows, the way God says, the way God knows good and evil. Trust me. It's what he said to Job. I know you've been through a lot of stuff and you think that makes me bad and unfair and unjust, but you don't understand, and I just want you to trust me. Other folks have said that through the years. The Bible, there's all sorts of things we can't explain, all sorts of things we don't really understand. And God just says, you can't get it all. Just trust me. Take my hand. Follow me. Love one another as I have loved you, and that will take care of everything you need to know about the knowledge of good and evil. Love one another as I have loved you. And trust me with the rest. And that's the invitation. That's the invitation God gave Adam and Eve all the way back in the garden so many years ago. Just trust me. Take my hand and trust me. And they said, we need to know for certain. We need to know ourselves. We can't just trust you. And everything went wrong. Everything went wrong. Trust, not certainty, is what God invites us to. It's what Jesus calls us to. When he called those disciples that left everything and followed him, he didn't give them all the answers. And most of the answers he gave them, they didn't understand. And they didn't really trust him until he came back from the dead. And then they trusted him all the way to their own deaths. And that's what Jesus calls us to trust him. Trust, certainty, and the knowledge of good and evil. Let's pick trust. In Jesus' name, amen.